So the outcome data, we work with our stakeholders to set targets that we believe are reasonable for improving our outcomes for students with disabilities. Compliance indicators are set by the federal government, and those are generally all 100%. And so that is a high bar that we continue to reach and strive for through continuous improvement. And based on these data, we have identified the priority areas of support to our public school units to be the participation and performance on statewide assessments. So it was good to hear from Dr. Howard's report that participation has increased overall last year. Suspension and expulsion rates for students with disabilities, preschool outcomes, child find and early childhood transition, secondary transition, and post-school outcomes are those outcome measures that we have identified based on the targets that our public school units need more assistance with. And so then I segue into part 2 of the report, and I highlighted activities that fall in that same data collection year, just for reference, so that since these are paired together, I wanted activities to be correlated to the data collection year as well. And so you will see in your materials and on the slide our activities around reading and math, looking at our specialty areas as a result of a student's disability, particularly in the areas of dyslexia and dyscalculia. However, we also are partnering with our general ed folks because our special ed programs are to support students and their involvement in general education programs. So we have had our consultants participate in the letters training. We're also having our early learning sensory support teachers participate in letters training this year because they are responsible for supporting our children who are deaf or hard of hearing or have visual impairments as they transition from preschool into kindergarten. And letters is certainly a very important tool to have in your toolbox as we're working to support them in transitioning into public schools and in their general ed settings. You'll note too that there were and continue to be activities around the extended content standards. You heard us partner with curriculum and instruction on the development of the science standards recently, and collaborative training for transition with career tech and vocational rehabilitation. And then Project Aware is our activities with school-based mental health. We have 6 pilot sites, and our early data is showing that some of those efforts can be correlated to decreases in suspension because of some of those supports that are available. And so what I would like to point out now is our current activities. We look forward certainly to unpacking further our subgroup from the information that Dr. Howard shared today, and in forecasting and preparing for that and looking at what Superintendent Truitt has asked us to do through Operation Polaris with our support to districts and the strategic plan of eliminating opportunity gaps. We took a look at what we were doing in curating our support that is based on data, and in particular our SMART goals around the continuum of services based on needs expressed by the school or the district and upon data. And so what you see before you is called a few different things in our office. It's called the book, it's called the playbook, but essentially it's a compilation of all the activities that we hope to offer and support our public school units with this school year. And it starts off with hyperlinks to the data dashboard of the state performance plan and annual performance report that we've highlighted for you. And then it correlates to all of our communication loops, all of our supports, our professional learning, and different opportunities to engage with not only our local leaders but teachers as well. And our professional development opportunities have objectives that are correlated to the indicators that I shared at the beginning of the presentation. And so we think that this is a good faith effort to compile what is a lot from our office in a place that can streamline the focus and improvement efforts with a one-stop, if you will, to know how our office wants to engage with the field and how we can support you and message that ahead of time so that as districts are prioritizing their opportunities for engagement and scaling up their programs, they know it well in advance. So if they choose to engage and train the trainer models and so forth, they are using their human capital in a reasonable way and can plan ahead for things such as deadlines, training opportunities, and just knowing what's out there with no surprises, we think will help the stress not roll down or back up, but rather it is a continuous improvement that we are linked together with to accomplish. So we are asking that you consider this report for discussion this time and action in October because it's due October 15th.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchins. Any questions? All right, hearing none, we will look forward to acting on this next month.
Okay.
We have one final discussion item, which is a report to the General Assembly on the Career and College Ready Graduate Program and program outcomes. I think Dr. Mullenix and Ms. Shoulders-Royster are going to do this presentation for us today. I would just ask you, since we are running a little late, to sort of try and streamline it a bit if you can.
Perfect. Got it. I can do that. Michael Marr will also be closing us out today.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to remind everyone, CCRG is a partnership between the community college system, DPI, and the legislated vendor, the NROC Project, or EdReady is also another name for them. It is a legislated mandate, and the purpose is essentially so that students can go to North Carolina community colleges remediation-free. This is aligned to goals 1 and 2 of the State Board of Education strategic goals. And then you have heard about CCRG before now, although this is our first full year of implementation that we just wrapped up. This began back in 2016 with statewide pilots fostered by the community college system, as well as statewide training between DPI and the community college system. We had a partial implementation that was met with pandemic and financial challenges during 2020, 2021. There was no implementation the following year because it was an unfunded mandate. And that brings us to this current year that we'll talk about today. We received the funding for the NROC Project platform, as well as one full-time equivalent, which is Dr. Erica Shoulders-Royster, who you will hear from shortly. And then we have continued on with our academic year that we are in now, 2023-2024. We have renewed the contract with NROC Project. We are awaiting information from the community college system to provide professional development. And in the meantime, we are providing office hours to our public school units. As a reminder, CCRG is guided by the evaluation plan you see on the screen. I know that is very difficult to see. But today you will hear about those strategies and some of those outcomes that we have met. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Erica Shoulders-Royster. She joined us about a year ago. She was a principal in Franklin County Schools, and she's going to talk to us a little bit more about the data.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Mullenix, and thank you all for supporting CCRG. The data sources we will review today include an optional survey we sent out to staff and students. We had over 600 student participants and over 200 staff participants. We will also review other data sources such as the Canvas course analytics as well as the tier test completions. The first 3 evaluation questions that you see I will cover include cross-sector partnerships between community college system and DPI, resources and tools, as well as quality of support. Staff were provided 20 professional development sessions and over 90 office hours. Staff respondents felt like they knew who to contact and received a timely response. from a cross-sector partner. And looking at the cross-sector partnership, as you can see in the graph to the left, it depicts the response to the optional staff survey I mentioned earlier. In general, staff strongly agreed that we provided adequate support to them during this first year of implementation. They had ongoing access to regular professional development, technical assistance, and supportive supplemental resources. We also provided over 20 professional development, as I shared earlier, and 90 office hours. CCRG was met with several resources and tools for implementation, such as professional development options, as well as office hours and technical assistance. We provided updated, frequently asked questions. We had our first ever website launch this year, and Canvas course and training materials were updated on a regular basis. As the CCRG administrator, I constantly was in contact with district personnel and CCRG leads to ensure that they had the necessary resources and tools. Moving on to quality of support. We had I'm happy about, 1,000 educators that actively engage in the CCRG resources course. They typically participated in August and January. You'll see a higher concentration during that time. This is at the beginning of each school term. The CCRG instructors across the state who reiterated how much support they felt from Canvas course and other resources and tools. Next, we'll look at the next two evaluation questions, which covers criteria to determine eligibility for CCRG and participation rates amongst our students. As you can see from the graph, CCRG has eligibility and exemption criteria. All of this was set forth by the community college system, and you can see that on the screen in front of you. The criteria vary for English as well as math. As for eligibility and participation, the unweighted GPA is consistent for both content areas, 2.2 to 2.799. And of the optional survey respondents, more than 50% said that the GPA was what they used to maintain eligibility. Students also shared that they learned about CCRG from their teacher. Districts follow state guidelines by implementing and sharing information with parents. They were notified, and students also received counseling when necessary about CCRG at the school level. And there were lots and plenty of information ensuring that students knew about CCRG and had the necessary access. So, in taking a deeper dive into CCRG participation, my colleague Kaylin was able to run some demographics data for you that you can see on the screen. As you can see at the graph to the left, students were more likely to be male. A greater percentage are economically disadvantaged, and more than 50% of CCRG students identify students as students of color, and multilingual and academically and intellectually gifted students equate for less than 10% of the population. As I noted throughout the presentation, we received a great response rate from the optional survey that was given. I'll review a couple of the summary responses from our students. Majority of the students felt they had enough time to complete the CCRG coursework and take tier tests for credit. Less than 25% of our students felt that the content helped them learn new material. It's important to note that CCRG content is remedial. Slightly more than 25% felt that CCRG will save them money for college, and our students shared some key programmatic improvements related to accessibility to the platform as well as clear content language. They were not shy in sharing their feedback. Similarly, with our staff respondents, they also had some key things to share. Majority of staff felt that the support that they needed, they received for implementation. Many staff felt and found it difficult to motivate students around CCRG, and staff provided some key programmatic improvements, which included easier navigation, funding for additional teachers, greater clarity and purpose for the content, more support and communication with the local community colleges, and separating English out from the English 4 content for greater flexibility. So our final evaluation question is regarding student CCRG coursework completion. Thank you. So students must pass the math tier test to receive credit for math towards the community college system to enter remediation free. It took, if you look at the screen, Math 1, Math 2, and Math 3 students had over 80% pass rate. In the pass columns, over 4,000 students passed Math 1, over 3,000 passed Math 2, and over 2,000 passed Math 3. So our students performed at a high pass rate for math. As we look at the English, we see a different story. Please keep in mind that the English CCRG is embedded in English 4 only. We had 7 to 10% pass rate for English. And looking at the numbers, 742 students passed English 1, 120 students passed English 2. Note that in the attempts column, there is a number of students that attempted to pass. So 5,397 students made attempts to pass English 1, and over 2,000 made attempts in English 2. This is a drastic number of difference for our students completing CCRG English compared to the math. With that being said, I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Michael Marr to close us out with recommendations and conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, so I do want to thank Dr. Shoulders-Royster and the team for putting this data together, and just remind folks that this is, in fact, kind of the first year of full kind of implementation of this program that we do in partnership with the community college system. So first off, it is really important that we continue to have a sustained level of funding in order to implement the program effectively. We are recommending, and so I have reached out to Dr. Eads in the community college system. I look forward to working directly with her on discussing our recommendations for changes to this program and improvement, including looking at the reevaluation of the assessment curriculum and in particular the implementation. And so as you can see, math seems to be working pretty well. It's embedded in the NROC system. It's a series of modules. English, not so much. It's separated from the NROC system, and it's built inside of the English courses. Additionally, we have some longer-term, I've talked to the team about some longer-term data analysis, so we need to get a better handle on who are the students that enroll in this program, what happens to them when they leave their public school. Do they, in fact, enroll in a community college? If they enroll in a community college, do they then enroll in a remedial course, or are they being put into a credit-bearing course? And then what's the outcome of their performance in that credit-bearing course? And so, as you know, we sometimes have some challenges as students transition out of our K-12 and into the community college system, tracking those students. So that's part of what I intend to discuss with Dr. Eads as we continue to try to improve the program. So with that, I will be happy to answer questions or have Dr. Shoulders-Royster or Dr. Mullenix.
Yeah, I just want to point out for the board that I think part of the problem here is that the GPA requirements set by the community college are, again, as Dr. Shoulders-Royster said, 2.2 to 2.799, unweighted. So that is less than what the UNC system requires. So again, back to this relevancy issue for our students, why would they, we're telling them they have to do this, and yet why would they take it seriously if they can be admitted to a UNC system school?
Yeah, certainly. We had the discussion about we likely are serving the wrong population of students.
That's right.
So this is the first year, and we're learning as we go, and
we are.
We will continue to look carefully.
And part of my conversation with Dr. Eads will be about the kind of requirements in which we place students in this program, including whether or not it ought to be mandatory as opposed to being an opt-in program for students who intend to enroll in a community college.
At one time, I think NROC had a standard of something like 500 on an SAT score. You have to have over that. Is that factoring?
To be in the...
You have to be over
I'd have to
that.
look at that criteria list. Do you know?
It was over the national average for SAT score at the
Right.
time, which is, then you're saying if you're not over the national average, you would have to be in a remedial course, which
Right.
did not
And-
make a lot of sense.
And we didn't set those criteria.
I know
Yeah.
we did, but we have we ultimately entered an agreement and acceded to those criteria, which I think this board had a lot of reservations about at the time. It sounds like you do too.
Yes, sir. And this predates my
Right.
overseeing of the division that's overseeing us
Yes.
now. So I am attempting to try to rectify
And
whatever
I'm
I can.
encouraging you and thanking you for that work.
All right, thank you, Dr. Very
Just
quickly,
a
Dr.
very
Eisenman.
quick question. A question about remediation at the community college level. And maybe Dr. Tipton Rogers is the person to answer the question. But I thought that remediation courses were no longer
That's correct.
offered at community colleges. That goes back 2 years ago.
That's correct. Absolutely.
So then what?
Yes.
That's my question. I mean, these courses in English are frightening.
I agree.
All right, thank
Well,
you.
if I can give
Thank you so much.
and a little plug for our capacity here in the agency now to do some of this work through research and evaluation that we haven't had before. So the ability for us to continue to do this work relies on our capacity as a staff too. So I want to thank those folks as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Very quickly, there are a large number of consent items, and I'm going to try and just speed through these. SLA 6 is international sampled assessments. DPI needs our approval to notify selected schools that they have been chosen for this year's Teaching and Learning International Survey, and to convey the expectation of participation in support of the U.S. sample. This is an adult-only survey with only national level results. And then we've got 5 more, all of which are reports to the North Carolina General Assembly, so I won't keep repeating that. One is computer science participation in schools. This is an annual report that includes the number of teachers in the field, the courses offered, and the number of students enrolled. SLA 8 is 5th grade career awareness program. We receive this report every year. Local boards are encouraged to implement this program for 5th graders. This report focuses on program activities and student outcomes across the state. SLA 9 is statewide trends in student digital learning access. The state board establishes and maintains a dashboard to publicly display student digital learning data and reports annually on the numbers of devices and connectivity at school and at home. The report also includes key takeaways from the annual survey, showing a need for sustainable professional development and more human capacity with regard to technicians and instructional tech facilitators. The survey also showed inconsistent home internet connectivity due to the expense, a lack of dependable service, or a state unavailability of an adequate ISP. SLA 10 covers remote instruction plans and offers a comprehensive overview of the plans submitted to DPI for the 22-23 school year. It encompasses a link to the plans, the number of remote instruction days used, and trends in remote instruction. And then finally, a report on students with disabilities and definition of residence. This is an annual census of all children with disabilities residing in the state. And that closes the student learning and achievement.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We'll now move to the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, led by Mr. John Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I serve as the Chair of Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools with my co-chair, Ms. Jill Kamnitz. We have 2 action items today on first read. The first one is State Board of Education Policy and Rules update for the schools for the deaf and the blind, and I'd like to call on Ryan Collins.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here with you again. As you all recall, last month this board adopted a new set of admissions policies and procedures for this current school year for the schools for the deaf and the blind, pursuant to legislation that was passed earlier this year. Following that, the Office of General Counsel has gone back and reviewed the policy manual as well as the administrative code to identify any potential inconsistencies with existing policy or procedures. In the course of that, we did identify one policy, ESDB 14, that speaks to placement procedures. We also identified some conflicting provisions of the administrative code, specifically in subchapters 6K, which has to do with the educational services for the deaf and blind more broadly, as well as subchapters 6I and 6J, which deal individually with the schools for the blind and the schools for the deaf, respectively. In consultation with Dr. Derek Jordan, Dr. Lori Morrow, and the directors of the three institutions, they basically have recommended that the board go ahead and repeal all of these policies and administrative codes. Most of the provisions in the administrative code that deal with these schools are either outdated or the statutory authorization for those provisions no longer exists. There have been several statutory revisions to the governance of these schools over time, and just frankly, many of these policies and administrative rules are outdated. So the recommendation is that the state board repeal ESDB 14, which is a policy on placement procedures, and that it also initiate the process for repealing subchapters 6I, 6K, 6J, and 6K of Title 16 of the North Carolina Administrative Code dealing with these schools. Of course, that has to go through the rulemaking process, so that will take some time going through notice and public comment, things of that nature. But the board's approval is the first step in initiating that process. In addition, you will see that there is a formalized policy for the admissions procedures that were approved last week. So the content is what has already been approved. It's just been codified as a formal policy. And finally, there is a provision of the new legislation that requires the state board to identify the geographic coverage areas for the eastern and the north and western schools for the deaf. I have consulted with Michelle Hanley and Mark Davis, who are the directors of those institutions, and confirmed that the existing the existing county breakdown for each of those coverage areas. Currently, that is codified in Rule 101 of Subchapter 6J, which is to be repealed. Our office of General Counsel, believes that the requirement that the state board continue to provide those geographic areas can be accomplished through policy. There's nothing in the law that indicates it has to go through rulemaking. And doing it through policy gives you flexibility in the future should the demographics or the population of the state shift and there needs to be a realignment. So that is the one that is before you for approval. All of the others are before you recommended for repeal.
Any questions for Attorney Collins? Thank you, Ryan. EICS 2, approval of new State Board of Education policy, funding and accountability for charter schools. House Bill 618 became session law 2023-110 on August 16, 2023. This is an act to convert the Charter Schools Advisory Board into the Charter Schools Review Board, to shift the authority to approve charter schools and charter non-renewal from the State Board to the Review Board, and to create a right of appeal to the State Board of Education from the Review Board decisions. The State Board of Education, State Board, is charged by Article 9, Section 5 of the North Carolina Constitution to supervise and administer the free public school system and the education funds provided for its support, and shall make all needed rules and regulations in relation thereto, subject to laws enacted by the General Assembly. The proposed policy seeks to balance State Board's constitutional and statutory duties to supervise and administer charter schools, which are part of the public school system, and to administer or allocate the funds provided to those schools, with the new duties legislatively provided to the Review Board. I call upon Allison Schaefer, the State Board's General Counsel, to review with us the proposed policy. Allison.
Thank you. Before you have the draft policy for the board's consideration. There's a preamble that sets out that the Constitution of the State of North Carolina, Article 9, Section 5, requires the State Board of Education, or charges the State Board of Education to supervise and administer the free public school system and the education funds provided for its support, and to make all needed rules and regulations in relation thereto, subject to the laws enacted by the General Assembly. The new bill and the new law in Chapter 115C, which is the charter school and it amends the charter school laws, authorizes the establishment of charter schools, and also changes the governance. The new bill changes the governance, as Mr. Blackburn indicated, from a charter school advisory board to a charter school review board. The new statutory provisions provide that the state board retains its constitutional authority to establish all rules for the operation and approval of charter schools. However, the law modifies that authority by providing that any rule adopted by the state board shall be first recommended by the charter school review board. The newly revised statute also retains for the state board its constitutional authority to allocate funds to charter schools and to ensure accountability from charter schools for school finances and student performance. It designates to the review board, it discusses the new review board and provides that it is located administratively within the Department of Public Instruction and shall report to the State Board of Education. It is given the following duties. 1, to make recommendations to the State Board on the adoption of rules regarding all aspects of the charter school operation. Number 2, to review and approve or deny charter applications, renewals, and revocations. 3, to make recommendations to the State Board on actions before the State Board on appeal. And to 4, undertake any other duties or responsibilities as assigned by the State Board. In addition, the chair of the review board is required to advocate for the recommendations of the review board at meetings of the State Board of Education upon the request of the State Board. In order to balance the constitutional requirements of the State Board and the charter with statutory and constitutional duties, and to allocate funds to charter schools and to ensure accountability from charter schools, the board is considering the following policy. 1, the request for allocation of funding in new and renewed charter schools, and for material charter schools, those would come before the board for allocation of funding. Specifically, applications approved by the review board would be presented to the state board for allocation of funding before funds are dispersed for that purpose, and also assurance that the application complies with legal requirements. Number 2, renewals, again, would come before the state board for allocation of funding, and also with assurances that the charter school is in compliance with the legal requirements imposed on it by law. And number 4, material changes that would result in a change in funding would come before the state board for an allocation of funding, again, and assessment of legal requirements. And finally, the supervision and administration of the charter schools, consistent with statutory and constitutional duty to supervise and administer the free public schools, and consistent with its obligations to oversee the operations of the public school entities, and consistent with the board's duty to hold schools accountable for student performance. The state board may request and shall receive regular reports on charter schools' finance, legal compliance, student performance, etc., from the different agencies of the Department of Public Instruction, as well as the review board. That is the policy before the board.
Okay, you've heard summary and our new recommended policy. Are there any questions?
I do. I have a question.
All right, Dr.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blackwell. What I want to do, first of all, is clarify my vote this morning, my second to the state treasurer's motion to withdraw this item from the agenda. So let me talk about that for just a minute. My concern about this policy is that it seems premature. Now, I know we've got to get busy because the law has been passed, and I know the Charter Review Board needs to get busy too. They've got work to do. But I think that we could wait a little while. I think we could wait probably 30 days with a discussion between Chair Davis and Vice Chair Duncan, and perhaps you, Mr. Blackwell, and others, with the leadership of the review board, and say, look, we need to get some things cleared up here. Number one for me is, if we are an appellate body, and I think that's what we're now called in the legislation or something to that effect, what I hope to read in front of me today in terms of this policy is then how do we operate as an appellate board? What does that mean for us? What are the processes that need to be in place for us to hear an appeal coming to us by a charter applicant that was denied by the charter, I keep saying CSAP, but the review board? I want to know that. And I just think that my desire would have been, let's put it off for a little while, give it that 30 days that we always do with the discussion item, and let the leadership from the state board and the new review board get together and talk this through, and then come back next month and do what we need to do. Now, that's my big concern all along, is that, wow, I was going to open this up and read, oh, now we're an appellate board. What does that mean? Let me read my responsibility. How am I supposed to think now as an appellate body with regard to charters that are denied by the review board? The other thing is, my question is this. Okay, so all these things that are outlined in the policy, good work, I mean, drafted well, except my concerns that I've laid out. So does that imply that the state board could withhold funding of the recommendations that are brought to this board by way of information? See, I see maybe the Office of Charter Schools coming to us on a monthly basis or some systematic basis with information about charters that have been approved. And then the financial reports that are in law that they have to bring to us on an annual basis, and the other, like the performance review findings that take place every year on those 3-year, 7-year, 10-year cycles. I know that information will be coming to us through the Office of Charter Schools. But my other deeper question is, does all this mean that, and I understand what the Constitution dictates to us. I am very, very sensitive to my role as a member of the state board as directed by the North Carolina Constitution. But does that mean that we could withhold funding of charters that have been approved by this review board? That's a rhetorical, somewhat rhetorical, maybe it doesn't need an answer. That is the reason I did a second this morning to Treasurer Falwell's motion to withdraw this item. I think that it needs to come off the agenda for that reason, to give it a 30-day pause. It's important. It's huge, folks. This law is huge. And our role, the revision to our role is huge. So I just think of all items that have ever come before this board since I've been on the board since 2013, this one really deserves a discussion, not an action on first read. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. That was all relevant conversation. It was all well thought out. And we, as a committee, gave that a lot of attention and a lot of thought. And you didn't need to explain your second. I appreciate anybody that wants to make a motion or a second, that's fine. But we felt that the Charter Review Board will start meeting on Friday, and then they'll have some actions next week. So we felt that this was needed to come before us on action on first reading. So, any other comments, Alice?
So my response to that is that this bill passed on June 28th, and this board could have foreseen the fact that it would be overridden by the legislature, and even if we take it to the day that it was overridden, which was August 16th, this the Department of Public Instruction staff did not see this policy until Thursday late afternoon. So there should have been more time for DPI staff to review this. Our CFO had not seen it. The Office of Charter Schools had not seen it. There was ample time for something to get in front of DPI staff.
Thank you for your comments. I'm not sure how we would have known whether it would have been overridden or not, but that's my comment to that.
Well,
I got to speak up on this in the same vein. The fact that this has been written, presented to the superintendent on Thursday, major policy that's going to affect changes in how we do business. It was presented to her on Thursday. That was going to be the first question I asked. Didn't get to my office until a few days later, I don't think. The president of the Senate, the lieutenant governor of North Carolina sits on this board, got to me just a few days ago. Inexcusable. And it smacks of political maneuvering is what it smacks of. It's ridiculous. This is a serious policy change. If you wanted to do it, it should have started the moment the bill was passed and been done in that week. And we should have had adequate time to discuss this. We have not had the time to discuss it. We have not had the time to formulate the arguments we need to argue against it. One day of discussion for a policy change. One day. One day. When else has that been done? On something this serious? When else? Somebody go search the record and find it. It's not professional, it's not courteous, and quite frankly, it smacks of almost dishonesty. I'm just going to be plain and saying it. And I know what's going to happen here. You're all going to listen to what I'm saying. You're going to listen to what Mrs. Oxendine is saying. You're going to listen to what the superintendent's saying. You're going to move forward, and you're going to do what you want. But I can assure you, this will not go unnoticed. The parents of this state are demanding better. They demand better out of this board and better out of us. And quite frankly, we should demand better out of each other. And to do this in one day is unfair. It's unprofessional. And it smacks of political pandering. And it should not be tolerated on an issue this important. Do what you want to do, but you've heard my voice.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Any other comments, questions? Chair Davis?
Yeah, I'm glad to respond. So, yes, the bill passed on August 16th. That's when we knew we had to do work. The very next board meeting since the bill passed is this one. Careful reading of the law was required, and it's a complex issue because the law has many apparent inconsistencies with that. And as soon as our very small, limited staff could put together a draft policy was last Thursday. And this item, more than any other item on our agenda, had a longer discussion before this meeting than any other item. But the reason why I firmly, as a member of this board, believe that the board should continue to focus on our financial accountability stems from the truth that over the last few years, 7 charter schools have closed. At least 5 of them with questionable financial situations, which are currently being reviewed by federal officials, one of which, Bridges Academy, became public yesterday, in which a school was requesting funding for 40% more students than they actually had. We take our funding responsibilities seriously. We aim to work in a collaborative way with the Charter Review Board. Vice Chair Duncan and I have already had conversations with our counterparts on the Charter Review Board and plan to continue to do so as soon as Friday. We intend to work in a collaborative fashion in reviewing the 21 policies that need to be revised, on hearing the concerns that the Review Board has and sharing our own, as well as operationalizing this policy to address many of your concerns, Dr. Oxendine. But because the Review Board plans to start moving forward next week on applications, it's important for us to get this minimum set of policy, which in short says, Review Board, when you approve an application or renewal or something that requires funding, come talk to us about it. It's as simple as that. And it affirms their role in the new governance, affirms our role according to the Constitution, and as stated in the law that created the Review Board. Sure, I would like for us to have a couple of months to discuss this. We didn't get a couple months. We got a couple weeks. And unless we want to tell the review board to pause on considering any applications next week to give us a chance to spend 30 days reviewing this policy, I think we need to act now.
Superintendent.
So the board may have spent a couple of weeks doing this, but DPI staff did not. And further, I would say that when we had on Thursday afternoon internal conversations, one question that was asked that is still not answered in this policy is what are the criteria, to Dr. Oxendine's question, what are the criteria that the board could use to not provide funding? Because I will tell you, this board doesn't hear about when LEAs mismanage funds. You hear about it when charter schools mismanage funds. It happens all the time, whether it's deliberate or not. And so I don't see that what a couple of bad actors have done should be a policy that jeopardizes essentially the ability of a charter school to open its doors to the families who've chosen to go there. Because this board, according to the way the policy is written now, because it is so vague, would allow for this board to vote not to open a charter school and not give a reason. And so if this policy contained parameters or a checklist of sorts that would allow for the checks and balances that you may want, that would be a different story. But right now, this policy is so vague that for any reason, this board could deny funding. And as far as the constitutional duty that this board has to supervise and administer funds, as far as I've always seen it, means that you send money to schools per the law, provided they are in compliance. And so if the Charter Review Board has deemed that a school is in compliance, then this board cannot withhold funds. Now, if you want to have a checklist that in the policy that says if these criteria are met, then they shall receive funding, then that's between y'all and the legislature. But I fail to see how the discussions that we've had so far do anything to support children.
I'll respond to that. So each year, the DPI staff brings to us a request to approve allocations to schools. That's when we exercise our funding authority, just as we would under this policy. We take the financial performance of our charter schools and LEAs seriously. And when staff informs us of financial mismanagement or questionable practices in LEAs, we act. We've gone so far as to remove